Welcome to Cleveland State University, and thank you for joining us this evening for the second in a series of TEDx Salons at CSU. My name's Matt Zone, and I'm fortunate to serve our city as a member of Cleveland City Council and also a graduate of the CSU Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs, who now has not only the privilege of serving as a councilman, but I am also the recently elected president of the National League of Cities. And our organization represents mayors and council members throughout the United States. There's approximately 120,000 elected officials, and the topic tonight is very relevant to the work that we do. So I can't think of a more appropriate setting than the campus of this urban university in the heart of downtown Cleveland for us to take a deep dive into a fascinating topic, the Resurgent city. You know, our former beloved mayor and U.S. Senator George Voinovich, who was affiliated here with the university, said his greatest calling, his greatest job he ever held was being mayor of the city. And he often talked about how the universities were such a big part of it. And George Voinovich in 1985 was, again, the only other Clevelander to serve as the president of the National League of Cities. So in the new book, in his new book, Thank You for Being Late, Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Thomas Friedman examines how technology, globalization, and climate change are reshaping our world at an unprecedented rate. These accelerations, as Friedman calls the fast-moving forces, are having a profound impact on everything from our workplaces to our politics. And in an era of quick upheaval, success belongs to the nimble and those who can respond quickly to rapid-fire change. Friedman contends that cities are ideally suited to step up to meet the accelerated challenge for our time. He goes on to write that a healthy city, town, or community is going to be the most important building block in the 21st century. Citing Gertie Grinstein of the Root Group, an Israeli policy institute, Friedman goes on to argue national governments are just too cumbersome, distant, and in too many cases gridlocked to have the agility needed in the age of acceleration. And the single-family unit is too weak to stand alone in the face of a hurricane-force winds of change. Our cities, on the other hand, are ideally and uniquely equipped to address change and to support the employability, productivity, and the quality of life of their citizens, Friedman contends. He writes, here is the good news. Traveling around America today, you will find so much innovation happening at the community level. And we see that every day at this university. In reflecting on Friedman's thoughts, I couldn't help but think of some of the community partnerships that my alma mater, Cleveland State University, is cultivating. CSU is truly an anchor institution in our city. In partnership with the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, CSU is creating a clearer path to college for young students in our city via the Campus International School and the MC Square STEM High School. In partnership with Northeastern Ohio Medical University, CSU has launched the NeoMed CSU Partnership for Urban Health, geared toward recruiting and training more diverse healthcare workforce to provide primary care in Cleveland's medically underserved urban communities. And earlier this month, a new collaboration was announced among university hospitals, CSU, and Cuyahoga Community College that will proactively address the impending shortage of nurses in Northeastern Ohio by establishing a workforce development pathway to increase the number of nurses. So I'm sure we can forward to other examples of innovation thinking that defines the Resurgent city from our distinguished panelists this evening. Up first is Ted Howard, co-founder and president of the Democracy Collaborative, which seeks to transform economic systems to enhance equitable and inclusive outcomes, foster ecological sustainability, and promote flourishing democratic and community life. Mr. Howard previously served as executive director of the National Center for Economic Alternatives and as a Steve Minter Senior Fellow for Social Justice at the Cleveland Foundation. Please join me in giving a warm CSU welcome to Ted Howard.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out on this rainy day here in Cleveland, Ohio. I moved to this city about 6 years ago because I thought what was taking place here was so innovative, was so path-breaking for our nation that I left Washington, D.C., inside the Beltway, where I'd lived for about 30 years, to move to Cleveland, Ohio. So I'm a proud resident of the Glenville neighborhood on the east side up near University Circle. So today, or tonight, my brief remarks, are going to be about the role of what are called anchor institutions, places like this institution, Cleveland State University, in revitalizing and rebuilding the local economies of our communities. Doing so by leveraging their procurement, their hiring practices, the investment of their endowment, and much else about the institutions to really transform our cities. So the first thing is obviously, what are anchor institutions? It's probably a term you've heard. Anchor institutions are place-based institutions, the biggest of which are universities and hospitals, often called eds and meds. Economists refer to institutions like this as sticky capital. When you look out on Euclid Avenue here, all the businesses, in 100 years, most of that will be gone. They'll have been bought out, they'll have moved, some will have failed. We can be pretty sure Cleveland State's going to be here because it's an anchor institution. Most of these institutions, overwhelmingly, are nonprofit or public. So they have a social mission. And it's that social mission that starts to drive the logic of how these institutions can operate in a way that really has a positive impact on our communities. I'm going to look particularly at the economic dimension. Other speakers will look at other aspects of anchor institutions. We're talking about a lot of money. This is a big part of our economy. You can see the figures up there. More than 9 million people employed in anchor institutions, just the eds and meds. And that doesn't include city governments, philanthropy, other kinds of anchors. But this is a very big part of our economy. Annual expenditures between the eds and meds, over $1 trillion. A lot of money, and we're going to return to that theme as we go forward. And these are different ways that institutions like yours can organize their business model to make sure that people in Cleveland benefit. So you can buy your goods and services, the chairs, everything you see here has to be bought by your institution. Now you can buy it from China, you can buy it from Chicago, you can buy it from Miami, or you can buy it from Cleveland. And when you buy it from Cleveland, you keep the money in your community. You get a multiplier effect. You start to create greater employment for the people of your city. So a lot of people say, Cleveland's one of the poorest cities in America. And if you look at certain kinds of figures, that's the truth. But within this city, there are multi-billion-dollar institutions that can contribute to our revitalization and rebuilding. Now, these are just very quickly a couple examples of other kinds of institutions in other cities that are doing this sort of work of refocusing their business model. So you see up here 2 hospitals in Boston, which have intentionally gone out to hire people from low-income neighborhoods, support them to become productive in the economy, and bring them into their workforce. Good-paying jobs with career ladders. You could see university hospitals. That's an example right here in Cleveland. They looked at their workforce and said, we don't employ very many people from the surrounding neighborhoods. We need to do that because it's good for our community. And so they built a program called Step Up to UH. It's a pipeline into low-income neighborhoods like Glenville and Fairfax and Huff. And they're intentionally recruiting people into their institution for the first time from these neighborhoods. About 200 jobs have been created so far. In terms of investment dollars, Dignity Health is a Catholic health system out in 3 western states, California, Arizona, and Nevada. They took $100 million of their endowment, which is about $1 billion. They took $100 million and turned it into a revolving loan fund to provide loans to local businesses, mostly owned by women and people of color, that could not get loans from commercial banks because they knew if they give these companies loans, they'll go out and hire people in the community who need jobs. Creative use of your money. And there's Gunderson Health System in Wisconsin that said, we want to become a green system. and they have put their money, because it'll be good for the community and our business, they've put their money into greening themselves, and they're 100% now off the grid. Totally self-generating, sustainable, renewable energy. Very quickly, a university example. I have to go through these slides a little fast, I apologize. Drexel University is in Philadelphia. It's a university that we at the Democracy Collaborative do some work with, as we do with Cleveland State here with Dean Roland Anglin and his team. Drexel looked at their purchasing and found in their purchasing, their supply chain, $140 million that could be localized that was leaving their community, and they have a very low-income neighborhood right across the street from them. So they're systematically working through this to take that $140 million and drive it locally. And it will have a big economic impact. More people will be hired, more people will be productive workers and citizens, more people paying taxes to the general fund of the city, which is good for the school system, repairs the roads, funds the police, and everything else that we need done. One of the big developments that's taking place in anchor institutions now is that institutions have realized they could go it alone and try to improve their community, or they could band together with other anchors and form collaboratives. My organization works with a number of these around the country. This is Albuquerque. It's called Healthy Neighborhoods Albuquerque. 6 of the major anchors of the city, including the mayor's office. And by the way, if you think this kind of sounds like liberal, progressive, do-good stuff, well, you know, the mayor of Albuquerque is a solid conservative Republican. He just thinks it makes sense to conduct his city in this way. And I know Matt's own, many of his members are obviously Republican mayors who are also getting on board with this kind of strategy to lift ourselves up using the assets that we have in our community to build wealth. So Healthy Neighborhoods, Albuquerque is underway, targeting hiring local people who are been unemployed, supporting local small businesses, building cooperative ventures, and so forth. Chicago has something called CASE, Chicago Anchors for a Strong Economy. 15 of the biggest institutions, including the city government, University of Chicago, Rush Medical Center, and so forth, all working together to localize their procurement, to create contracts for local small businesses, again, mostly minority-owned, that will hire people that need to be hired. Here in Cleveland, we have the Greater University Circle Initiative. That's a partnership of Case Western Reserve University, University Hospitals Cleveland Clinic, the city government, Mayor Frank Jackson, and the Cleveland Foundation, working together to create opportunity in the eastern part of the city near their campuses. Their signature project that many of you may know is called the Evergreen Cooperatives, where about 140 people now working in worker cooperatives, supplying goods and services to the large institutions, including on East 55th Street. We have built the largest core urban hydroponic year-round greenhouse in the country. We have about 3 acres, 3.5 acres under glass, producing 3 million heads of lettuce and 300,000 pounds of basil in downtown Cleveland, owned by the people who work in that company because it's a worker co-op. Pretty cool, huh? And then right here, of course, Cleveland State University is part of the campus district with a couple other of the major institutions, Tri-C and St. Vincent's, doing the same kind of thing in the neighborhoods. So let me conclude, because I got a 2-minute warning, with where do I think all this is going? There is a movement building among higher education institutions and hospitals, healthcare systems all over this country who know that they can no longer be walled off from the community, that their fate is intimately and inextricably bound up with the fate of the community, that you cannot have a successful Cleveland Clinic if the Fairfax community is collapsing around it. That is the movement that is starting right now and has been going on. This didn't exist 10 years ago. So we are living at a very interesting time as this force starts to build in our communities. And what I think of it is the anchor mission. In other words, imagine you're a multi-billion-dollar institution like the ones I've been talking about. It's not enough to have a nice little office with 5 people in it whose job is to do good things for the community. The issue is aligning all of your place-based economic power, your purchasing, your investment, your hiring, and all the rest of it, along with your intellectual and human capital for the benefit of the long-term well-being of the community in which you're based. My last slide, I actually have 2 slides, but I'm only going to use one because my time's up. What is the implication for our communities? Here in Cleveland, these are just 4 of our major anchor institutions. Together, they purchase every year, year in, year out, over $3 billion of goods and services. That's not their employment base, which, by the way, Cleveland Clinic is the largest private employer in the state, and University Hospitals is in the top 5. They have tens of thousands of employees. It's not their new construction. It's just keeping the doors open. $3 billion. So I would challenge you to envision big. What could be the impact in a community like Cleveland, Ohio, if we captured as much of that $3 billion as we could and drove it toward equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development for the people of Cleveland, Ohio? Thank you very much.
Great presentation, Ted. You know, if we're going to create true economic mobility and true economic opportunity, government cannot do it alone. You need philanthropy, you need academia. It's really all hands on deck. So, Ted, thank you for your presentation. Next, we're going to hear from Dr. Danette Howard, who's the Chief Strategy Officer and Senior Vice President at the Lumina Foundation, the nation's largest foundation focused solely on increasing student access and success in post-secondary education. Dr. Howard oversees Lumina's efforts to reform state and federal higher education policy and mobilize employers, metropolitan areas, and higher education institutions and other key actors to improve post-secondary attainment. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a warm CSU welcome to Dr. Danette Howard.
Good evening, everyone. There you go. I'm delighted to be here. My work at Lumina Foundation now has me living in Indianapolis, but I'm originally from New York, and I'm not from that part of New York that you're probably thinking of. I'm from the part of New York where if you're from the 5 boroughs, you say, you're not really a New Yorker. And I'm also from that part of New York where if you're from Rochester or Buffalo, people say you're also not really from upstate New York. I'm from Newburgh, New York. Has anyone ever heard of Newburgh, New York? Newburgh, New York is about an hour north of the city and about 90 miles away from our state capital of Albany. And one of the things that I loved most about growing up in Newburgh, New York, is that no matter what part of the city you were from, if you were from a more affluent suburb or from the inner city, you really got to go to an excellent school and you had access to wonderful teachers. And if you were from my generation and you went to those wonderful schools and interacted with those excellent teachers, you got to go off to college anywhere in the country that you wanted to go. Or you got to stay locally if you wanted to do that also. But if you were of my mother's generation, most people didn't have many options. And so what my mom did, although she is one of the most brilliant people I know, is she stayed in Newburgh and began to work, and soon she and my dad got married, and soon after they were married, my sister came along, and 4 years later, there I came along. And as the story goes, and I've heard it so many times that I could probably recite it in my sleep, once my sister and I came along, my mother suddenly knew that all of a sudden, she was responsible for these 2 little lives. And in order to make sure that we had better lives, she had to do something better for her own life. And in Newburgh, we didn't have access to an elite university or a large public research university. And we didn't even have a community college within our boundaries in Newburgh. But what we did have was a small, independent Catholic college, actually, that was very committed to serving the residents of our community and did not have any interest in setting itself apart from our city, but saw its own success as inextricably linked to the success of our city and of its neighborhood. And because of that, that college, Mount St. Mary's College, is where my mother was able to get her bachelor's degree after 8 long years. And I think that because of that, I get to stand here on this stage with you tonight. And I think that Mount St. Mary's College exemplifies all of the characteristics of a post-secondary anchor institution. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight. So at Lumina Foundation, as you heard during the introduction, we are incredibly privileged to be able to work on one single issue. Most foundations work on a variety of things, but at Lumina, the only thing that we are focused on is ensuring that more students get the opportunities that my mom had to go to college or to go to some other type of post-secondary institution and to obtain a high-quality post-secondary credential. And about a decade ago now, we started to look more closely at some of the research that showed that the United States was actually falling further and further behind in terms of post-secondary attainment rates. As you know, we used to be first in the world. We started to fall back to 10th and then 12th, and we started to grow very concerned by that. At the same time, we became aware of some data that showed that by the year 2020, 60% of jobs were going to require some form of post-secondary education beyond high school. Not all of them would require a bachelor's degree. Some would require a high-quality certificate or certification, but many more individuals were going to need some sort of training beyond high school. And of course, all of this was undergirded by what we all, many of us already knew, that benefits of all sorts accrue to the individual, but as well as to society at large, when more of us are able to secure those high-quality credentials. Of course, earnings increase, unemployment rates plummet, individuals are more civically engaged, the health and well-being of individuals and the community increase, and we are able to begin to address that in what seems to be that insurmountable issue of poverty. So what I believe is that education is the key to lifting an individual, a family, and a community out of poverty. And what the data show us, and what this particular slide shows us, is if that individuals who are born in the lowest income quintile, lowest of the low, poorest of the poor, for those individuals that do not go to college, do not secure any type of post-secondary credential, the odds of them remaining in the poorest of the poor are incredibly high. However, if you go to college and you secure a degree, the odds of you being in any one of the 5 income quintiles is pretty even. So that means you have a fair shot, right? And we want people to have a fair shot. And that's what earning a college degree does. So all of this informed what we started to do at Lumina Foundation in around 2012 and 2013. And that's when we established Goal 2025. It started out as being Lumina's goal, but we really wanted it to be a goal that the nation embraced. And that was that we would help the nation to earn Americans, 60% of Americans would earn high-quality post-secondary credentials by the year 2025, because we believe that more Americans need those high-quality post-secondary credentials in order to meet the talent demands of the nation. When we first started tracking the goal in 2008, under 40% of Americans had those high-quality credentials, so that would be degrees and certificates. We are now up to almost 46%. I know that seems to be incremental movement, but after years of stagnation, years of no movement at all, that represents millions of more people who have been able to earn those degrees and credentials, and millions of lives that have been transformed and changed. So that's the good news, but 2025 is not that far away, and we still have a long way to go. So there is a sense of urgency around what we're going to do to get there. The other thing that we are incredibly mindful of in terms of our work and the attainment goal is that looking at the overall rate, as we just did, is one thing, but you have to look underneath the overall rate to see that there are significant gaps in who is earning these degrees and certificates. And there are certain populations that are underrepresented in terms of the completion and attainment cohorts. Most specifically, African Americans, Latinos, and American Indian students. And so at Lumina, we felt it was very important that our work get very targeted around those populations as well as adult learners. So how does that come back to post-secondary institutions in communities? That time went by very fast. In 2013, for the very first time, Lumina began to make some investments specifically in communities, and we had never done this before. We invested in 75 communities that committed to developing a post-secondary attainment goal. And so if all of you know this, mayors and council members have a lot of things that they have to focus on. So for 75 communities to step up and say, we're going to have a goal to increase attainment, that was a very big deal. I just wanted to share with you some of the really exciting outcomes for some of these communities and the role that the colleges in the communities played. Santa Ana College in California, they outpaced their goal by 4,900 credentials in a 4-year period. Some of the things that they did is they did away with a semester-by-semester schedule because they found that for working adults, semesters really didn't work. So they did year-round scheduling so that adults can register for classes in a way that works for them. They also guaranteed students could get seats in those high-demand classes because they found that for some students who needed one class to graduate, they had to sometimes wait another entire year to get that class, and that was causing them to delay their graduation rate. Albuquerque is another city, another community that we supported and are incredibly proud of their outcomes. They have a goal that 60,000 new credentials will be awarded in their city by the year 2020. They have already awarded 16,000 in the first 4 years of their initiative. They've done that by working very closely with the community college and the local workforce to specifically understand what types of skills are needed by the local workforce and how the community college can help meet that demand. And I think most importantly, the institution's goals are not about only what the institution can gain, but they are developed within the context of how that also is linked to the community's success. I'm going to skip North Carolina and go right to Cleveland because that's one of the communities that we were pleased to support. Very thrilled to see that the high school graduation rate in Cleveland is now an all-time high according to what our partners here report. Yay, kudos. The councilman started the round of applause. Cleveland State and Cuyahoga Community College, I got my pronunciation checked before I came up here, are focusing on guided pathways to make sure that students who transfer from the community college to Cleveland State, they aren't lost in the shuffle. So many students lose a ton of credits between that transfer process that they almost think that it's not worth it. But I understand that your institutions are working together very closely so that students have a seamless experience, which is fantastic. And this higher education compact of Greater Cleveland, you're really working to engage stop-outs. Now, there are stop-outs all across the country. Who knows what I mean when I say stop-outs? Who's heard that term before? Stop-outs are students who, life happens to all of us. So you're enrolled in college and you think, oh my goodness, someone in my family has gotten sick, or I need to take on another shift at work. I'm just gonna stop out for a semester. And then a semester turns into a year, and then a year turns into 4 years, and the next thing you know, you've been out of school for a decade, and then you think it's too late to go back. So here in Cleveland, you are working to re-engage those students and get them to graduation. As I take my seat, I just wanted to go back to the fundamental definition of what it means to be an anchor, and think about that, about the role of an institution in terms of increasing post-secondary attainment. Something that can be relied upon for support, stability, and security. And I think about that, Mount St. Mary's College, nearly 40 years ago when my mom walked across that stage. Now I am on this stage, and I hope that you will continue to think about that as you yourselves have a role to play in ensuring that more students meet their post-secondary goals. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Howard, I don't know if I thank you for your presentation or thank your mom. Your mom, what a great role model. 8 years, but she did it. And look, today her daughter is a good doctor, so thank you for that provocative presentation. Tonight, we also have with us this evening two of Cleveland State University's own, Ronnie Dunn and Jonathan Whitmer-Rich. Dr. Dunn is an associate professor of the Levin College of Urban Affairs, specializing in racial and social justice, the criminal justice systems, and issues affecting minorities and the urban poor. He is the author of the book, Racial Profiling, Causes and Consequences. Dr. Dunn was appointed by Governor John Kasich to the Ohio Collaborative Community Police Advisory Board in 2015. Mr. Whitman-Rich is an associate professor in the Cleveland Marshall College of Law and is a nationally recognized expert on criminal justice reform and criminal procedure. He serves on the Cuyahoga County Advisory Committee to consider bail reform and as counsel to the Criminal Rules Committee of the Ohio Commission of the Rules of Practice and Procedures. Let's give a warm CSU round of applause and welcome to Dr. Dunn and Dr. Whitman-Rich.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. Myself and my colleague, Jonathan, we're going to briefly talk with you regarding the role of anchor institutions in enhancing community police relations. Many anchor institutions, such as universities and public hospitals, have their own individual police departments, such as CSU. And we know it's vitally important that those institutions, that those police departments practice community-oriented policing, the type of policing strategies that are conducive for promoting and sustaining positive community police relations. 92% of public colleges and universities and 38% of private universities have their own individual police department with full police powers, including the use of deadly force. Now, as I said, it's imperative that they be sensitive to the needs and the relationship within that community. As we know, we're currently, policing is a very critical issue in our country, so that is vitally important. There are examples of forms of policing, aggressive policing, that have been adversarial and corrosive to the relationship with the surrounding communities around anchor institutions. Case in point, the 2015 shooting at the University of Cincinnati of Samuel DuBose. Now, the irony there is that the city of Cincinnati, their police department was under federal consent decree, which they came under in 2001. Now, they have since reformed and transformed the relationship within that community to the point that Cincinnati's police department is now held up as a national model of community policing. So the university police department was under a memorandum of understanding with the host police department, the city police agency, and after that shooting occurred, data was reviewed and revealed that over the prior 3-year period, the police at the university were following an aggressive form of policing that had actually increased the number of citations administered to the population overall, but it was disproportionately impacting the African American community. It had increased by 3-fold, and the percentage that African Americans received had increased by 19%, and it was already disproportionately high. So that perpetuated adverse relationships within that surrounding community, and it led to protests. But there was no unrest when that shooting occurred in Cincinnati, and part of that is attributable to the positive relationship that the city police had garnered with the local community. If you recall, during that time period, there was protests and unrest in Baltimore coming off the heels of Ferguson. We here in Cleveland, we had demonstrations, but we remained peaceful as well. Another role that anchor institutions can play in enhancing public safety is that of the hospitals. Hospitals that employ violence-based hospital emergency intervention programs. And those programs, they utilize ex-offenders and former gang members as intervention specialists that are embedded in emergency rooms. And when a gunshot victim or a victim of some form of street violence is treated there in the emergency room, these outreach workers, coupled with social workers, intervene and try to counsel those victims from retaliatory violence, which perpetuates so much of the violence that we see unfolding in our inner city neighborhoods. There are 19 such programs across the country. Philadelphia has the Healing Hurt People program, as well as Cure Violence in both Baltimore and New York City. And these programs have proved effective in reducing the re-injury of participants in those programs. The arrest rates have been decreased and their employment rates have increased. The city of Cleveland has recently adopted this program, and they're implementing it both at university hospitals as well as Metro Health, working along with the Peacekeepers Alliance here in the city of Cleveland. So those are two examples of the critical role that anchor institutions play in helping to promote public safety and enhance community police relations. I'll now turn it over to my colleague, Jonathan, and he'll speak to you. Okay.
Thank you. So I'll talk about two specific examples of how this anchor institution, Cleveland State University, is playing a role in trying to bring national criminal justice reform efforts into this local community. And I'm thinking of bail reform and grand jury reform. So the particular, I think, attributes that an anchor institution of a university like Cleveland State University that's located in an urban center, some of the attributes that we have are our scholarly expertise, our local understanding, and our institutional independence. And so in both of those contexts of what we have going on, I think those are highlighted. Let's talk about bail reform first. There's a national bail reform movement going on around the country driven by some big national nonprofits and foundations. It's happening in various states and jurisdictions. Here in Cleveland, the Cleveland Plain Dealer has done a great job of highlighting some problems in the local area, shining a light on that. And our chief administrative judge of the Common Pleas Court, John Russo, has convened a task force to try to look at what's going on in Cuyahoga County. Can we make things better? So that task force is composed of folks you might expect: lawyers, judges, defense lawyers, prosecutors, bail bondsmen, right? The people involved in the system who know how it works. And also some professors, faculty members like myself and Professor Dunn, who are both on that task force, and our interim dean, Lee Fisher, who's one of the chairs of the task force. So what do we bring to that in particular? Well, first of all, our scholarly expertise. We have both, I think, the training and the experience and the time to delve into the deep and rich scholarly literature that exists in the country on best practices in how to run a bail and pretrial release system. We don't need to reinvent the wheel here in Cleveland. This is something that scholars around the country have been focusing on. But frankly, local judges and lawyers have day jobs, and it's a little difficult to wade through a 200-page report that just got released and another 100-page report from the ABA and rich scholarly literature, whereas that's what we do, right? That's in our wheelhouse. We've got the time and the expertise to be able to process this big literature that's out there and think about how it might work here in the city of Cleveland, which brings me to our local understanding, right? Harvard just released a great report in the fall on best practices in bail and pretrial release. The folks at Harvard have great scholarly expertise. They don't, I think, have the time to attend 18 meetings down at the Cuyahoga County at the Justice Center, right? Well, we've been attending the meetings, right? We have this local knowledge and the ability to be present and try to bring that national scholarship into this community and really figure out what can happen in Cleveland, in Cuyahoga County. And finally, institutional independence. Among that group, we've got a lot of great people on the task force, and all of them are working to try to figure out how to make a system that works fair and effectively for everyone. At the same time, the people who are participating in the system, the judges, the lawyers on both sides, the bail bondsmen, they each have kind of their own, the way they do things, their own turf that they might want to protect potentially. We all know how that works. And really the only interest that faculty members at Cleveland State University have in that task force is making sure that the system is fair and effective for all. We don't have skin in the game. We have this independence. And I think that allows us to bring into that process a very effective combination that hopefully will, it's a work in progress. So we'll come back next year and I'll tell you if we accomplished anything. But hopefully allows us to, work at making the bail and pretrial reform justice system work in Cuyahoga County so that system works based on assessment of risk of the individual, rather than detaining them or not detaining them based on whether they have any money, right? So that's one example. Another example, grand jury reform. Another issue that's gotten a lot of national attention in the wake of things like the Tamir Rice shooting and other police shooting around the country, where grand jury processes were held by prosecutors, lengthy, secretive processes. Nobody knew what was going on. Sometimes people were upset at the outcome, and there was a criticism of how the criminal justice system was working. Well, here in Ohio, the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, Maureen O'Connor, a graduate of Cleveland Marshall College of Law, convened a task force, right? We love task forces, to say, how can we reform the grand jury process in the state of Ohio? That task force met last year. They came up with some good recommendations. Well, now we've got to transform those recommendations into actually changing the law if we can do that. How does that happen? Well, in Ohio, among other things, we want to look at Rule 6 of the Ohio Rules of Criminal Procedure, which governs grand jury practice in the state of Ohio. To change the Ohio Rules of Criminal Procedure, you have to go through something called the Ohio Rules Commission, which, as you maybe heard in my introduction, I happen to be counsel to the Ohio Rules Commission. It's a role that means that when they have a proposal, say, we need to fix Rule 6, what can we do? We've got these task force recommendations. Well, they hand it to me, And I have the time and expertise to look around what are the models nationally, what could the language look like in this rule, and that's what I've been working on, among many other things, right, in that role over the last year. How can we amend Rule 6 to make it a more fair and effective system, to provide some transparency when it's needed to the grand jury process? And again, bringing my kind of scholarly expertise and institutional independence into that rule. At the same time, in the fall, I, with the support of my dean, organized a symposium at the law school where we brought scholars from around the country to talk about the role of the prosecutor and the grand jury in police use of deadly force cases. So we held a symposium here at the law school. We talked about ideas, and we got our students involved. The students who published the Cleveland State Law Review are publishing scholarly articles from those people, entering into the national scholarly debate on what are the best ways to do prosecution and grand jury practice in this particular area. So I think, again, those are two great examples. We'll see. They're both ongoing, so I can't tell you what the results of those are. We're still working on both of these. But where Cleveland State University, as an anchor institution in this community and in Ohio, is playing a really critical, concrete, day-to-day role in moving forward criminal justice reform in these two key areas. So, thank you.
Great job. I've had the good fortune and opportunity to work with Dr. Dunn. I have the privilege of serving as Cleveland City Council's chair of the Public Safety Committee. And 11 months before the findings came down from the Department of Justice, I began, actually my first, I think, professional meeting was with Dr. Dunn and some other colleagues looking at bias-free policing. And so we started to work and create a framework for what that ordinance would look like. Flash forward 3 months after that, we introduced an ordinance with the help of Dr. Dunn and James Hardiman and a few other well-respected scholars here locally, 7 months prior to even the findings coming down. So if Cleveland truly wants to become a resurgent city, you heard Dr. Whitman, Rich talk about bail reform, talking about grand jury reform, and creating constitutional policing. We need academic scholars. We need anchor institutions like CSU to be a part of helping us find the right path forward. So with that, to help summarize all the talks that you've heard tonight, we have the two deans with us. First, I'm going to introduce Dean Anglin, who is our amazing dean of the Maxine Goodman Levin College, who's doing a remarkable job. Grad of that college, give it up, come on, give it up, give it up. Dean Anglin is doing a fabulous job at looking at how the university can become more integrated into the city of Cleveland. The other dean with us is Lee Fisher, who is the interim dean of the Cleveland Marshall College of Law, a well-respected public servant who served our state as a state senator, attorney general, and lieutenant governor. With that, please give it up for our good deans.
Thank you, Councilman. Fabulous, fabulous. So, Lee, it falls to us to try and summarize this amazing discussion. And I don't know how we're going to do it, but we're going to try. You know, Lee and I were part of a planning committee that put to try to plan this event. And I want to start by saying the title, The Resurgent City, was thought through very carefully. We did not want to say that American legacy cities were back, that they had come back from the abyss. What we were trying to say is that there have been substantive efforts made over the last 40 years to bring them back to economic and cultural vitality, and how to talk about strategies that help to accomplish that. You know, we have many different strategies in this country to help cities. The low-income housing tax credit, the rise of CDCs, but we felt that anchor institutions were an important strategy, and you got the full flavor of that strategy tonight. But for me, you know, having worked with anchor institutions for much of my career, I am at the point where they are recognized and they're doing extremely good work, as we heard from Ted Howard. But do we need to go to anchor institution-led development 2.0. 1.0 said, let's harness the spend. Let's harness the economic impact, the economic vitality of these institutions in community because it's in their self-interest. And we heard from Danette Howard that that might be great and we can do good things using that spend, that economic vitality, but we have larger issues looming. Those larger issues are post-secondary attainment. How can we help communities that might have place-based development and progress, but the people are lagging and they can't get jobs in the new local economy or the regional economy? Should we deepen the impact of higher educational anchors in post-secondary attainment? We also heard from Ronnie Dunn and his colleague talking about neighborhood security. And that's an important bellwether for development, because if you don't have secure neighborhoods, investment won't follow. So what we have, I think, is the question of how to get to anchor-led development 2.0. And I harken back to something that Ted said at the end of his conversation. He said, partnerships are now the new frontier for anchor institutions. I heartily agree. We have to find ways of building robust partnerships, not just of eds and meds, but local institutions that have an impact and a role in their communities. And these partnerships ought to be robust-based partnerships that are data-driven, they have strong goals, and they have strong commitments by the leaders both in the community and in the institutions to get to what I'm now calling anchor-led development 2.0. Lee?
Thank you, Councilman. Okay, here we go. Okay. We've heard from some extraordinary experts, Professor Jonathan Whitmer-Rich, Cleveland Marshall College of Law, Dr. Ronnie Dunn of the Levin College of Urban Affairs, Danette Howard and her mother from the Lumina Foundation, and Ted Howard from Democracy Collaborative, and Matt Zone, Cleveland City Councilman, President of the National League of Cities. I should tell you, by the way, that the only reason that Matt Zone said some nice things about me, he didn't tell you that I married his sister. So he and I are sort of related. I want to just comment and follow up on what Dean Anglin said. First, I want to just relate to you a quick story. I was moderating a panel a few years ago at the Clinton Global Initiative, and sitting next to me was the president of Iceland, Ólafur Grimsson, and he pointed his finger at the room full of American citizens and said, "The problem with you Americans is you spend too much time waiting for Washington." Ted Howard and others have made the point here today that the truth is that these days, as Matt Zone also noted when he quoted Tom Friedman, that change is happening in the world today from the bottom up, from our cities and our mayors, not from the top down. And all you have to do is watch the news tonight or tomorrow morning and see how dysfunctional Washington, D.C. is. And I must tell you that is not a partisan statement, because no matter who would have been elected President of the United States, Congress would still be dysfunctional and hyperpartisan. But if you look down the street at City Hall and other city halls around America that Matt Zone works with every day, you will see mayors who are not dysfunctional, who are not partisan, who are focusing on moving their economic engines forward in ways that are nothing short of extraordinary. At an organization in which I serve as the senior advisor, CEOs for Cities, we research what makes cities successful. And our secret sauce spells out the word city. See the connected city. How do you connect your physical and human and social and digital capital. And the glue that keeps that capital together are our anchor institutions. CSU and CASE and Tri-C and Metro and Cleveland Clinic and UH. And those that, as Ted said, have sticky capital and are in it for the long term because they will not move. Their jobs are staying here. And when they connect that capital and they go to the I, the innovative city, and they create innovative districts where if you lose your job, you don't lose your parking place, because there are literally businesses like the Research Triangle and other places that literally congregate and connect together, so that in fact there are places that partner with their anchor institutions, that they create businesses, create ideas, create innovation zones or districts or hubs. And then we come to Danette Hauer's T, the talented city. It's the first among equals. I'll tell you why. As Danette Hauer said, the single greatest determinant of wealth in America today, whether it's individual wealth, whether it's family wealth, or whether it's a city or communities or states or even a nation's wealth, is educational attainment. In fact, most economists say that if you could only use one metric for a city's economic success, that metric would be per capita income. And the most direct connection to per capita income is educational achievement and attainment. And the best measure of educational achievement and attainment and achievement these days is, in fact, that post-secondary degree, certificate, or credential, most often but not always measured by the 2-year and 4-year college degree. 64% of a city's success, measured by that metric alone, comes down to one thing, and that is how much educational attainment you have. And here's an interesting statistic that I know Danette knows. For every 7% increase in a city's degree attainment, there's a 10% increase in the per capita income, average or per capita income of the entire community. Meaning that even those people without a college degree benefit by those who do. Meaning that on average, an entire community's health or economic health or per capita income goes up when people get those degrees and stay in their city. And then finally is the why, CITY. Your distinctive assets, your distinctive DNA. What makes you authentic as a city? What makes you different and separate? And one of the great things that makes us distinctive and separate is, in fact, Cleveland State University and the phenomenal relationships that Councilman Matt Zone outlined at the beginning, that we have with our healthcare institutions and in particular with our Cleveland Public Schools. The final thing I want to say is touch on something that Ronnie Dunn and Jonathan Whitmer-Rich said. It's my belief that change happens at the speed of trust. And no matter how well you are doing in a city, if you don't have a foundation and a culture of trust, everything else falls apart. It is the sticky capital, in many ways, of a city. And what better example of trust is the trust level between its community and its law enforcement community. I have the privilege of serving as a member of the Cleveland Police Community Commission. And we have been reaching out for the last year and a half all around this community to figure out ways we can restore a level of trust, and no surprise, we have a long way to go. But I would suggest and end with this, that one of my favorite books is by Stephen Covey, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And if you don't remember all 7 habits, remember this one, because this one is the key to restoring trust in our city and in our community today. It is seek first to understand, and only then to be understood. If we spent less time trying to be understood and more time getting into the skin of the other person and understanding them, we would have that culture of trust that builds a connected, innovative, talented, and distinctive city. Thank you. Question?
So now it's your time to ask questions of our presenters, and possibly we can answer a couple of questions too. So have at it.
You can ask questions to the presenters, and they will actually, they don't know this, but they will come up here on the red carpet and answer that question.
We have a question here and one back there. You were actually first.
Am I first?
Yes, go ahead.
So Detroit a number of years ago did a food economy study that I was involved with, and part of what we looked at was the anchor strategy that the city was considering. And the anchor strategy included organizations like the Ford Foundation, the hospital there, as well as Wayne State. One of the things that I think we found that differentiated their strategy was, in addition to having that commitment to buying locally, they had a hiring commitment, and they also had thresholds. Is this something that you're all seeing that will have a benefit from an anchor strategy on a community like Cleveland?
Ted Howard.
You want me to speak from here?
Speak from here.
Good question. Yeah, I think where we're finding there's lots of juice and we're getting real traction with these anchor strategies is not just buying local, but it's the buying local, the hiring local, the investing, it's deploying all of that. So kind of layering all that in. The one thing I'd really want to emphasize, though, is one of the nasty truths, right, about these anchor strategies, and really in terms of the 1.0 anchor strategies, is sometimes when you succeed in these, like all of a sudden there's more money going in the community, more people are employed, then all of a sudden the retail comes in, it's starting to become safer, people that were afraid to go there, now they want to go and move into Glenville or Fairfax, and then all of a sudden the people who lived there in all those years when the times were bad, they can no longer afford to live there. So when I started my remarks, I used the words equity and inclusion and sustainability. And part of the challenge for all of us in doing these strategies is not only to move beyond procurement to all the different ways that this benefit can be created that we've heard, but to do it in a way that keeps people in place rather than explodes communities and moves people out. And I think that's the big challenge and is part of the design of Anchor 2.0, and I'm going to steal that and use it all over the country shamelessly. Thank you, Roland.
Hello, my name is Wally Sharif. I'm from the Urban College. We've seen that the anchor institutions in Cleveland have been here for decades, if not for more than 100 years. What has happened in the past 5-10 years which Cleveland has started to become a resurgent city?
I can give my answer, but Lee is probably just as well positioned to give an answer. You know, part of anchor strategies involves key important leadership. And from what I can tell, just looking at the history of anchor involvement, you have the positioning of new leadership that started to work together for the betterment of the community. It's all about what Lee said, trust and engagement. I think leadership is very key to that.
I'm going to defer to my brother-in-law on this one.
Thank you, Dean. Government can't do it alone. And first of all, thank you for pursuing a career in the Levin College. Government can't do it by itself. I think Ted and Danita really captured why we have to leverage each other's assets. When you can pull together clusters of philanthropy and academia and government all together with grassroots people in the community, that's how you create the change. And we've realized early on at the National League of Cities that government can't do it. Local government can move swiftly, but if you want to create true change, it has to happen from within and up. And that only starts with our anchor institutions to create a resurgent city. Dean?
Got one here and one here, but I saw him first. Okay.
My name is Al Bragg. As a doctoral student at the Levin School, I've learned the value of research, but I've been surprised that the graduate students don't seem to use that research to help police and fire. I see an opportunity for graduate students, particularly I come from the fire service, to do some research so that we can do things more strategically in the fire service versus the way we've been doing it for 50, 60 years. Has there been any movement to let our anchor institution link up with our emergency services so that we can be more strategic?
Jonathan and Ronnie, you're on. Let me give you a mic. Here you go.
Thank you for that question, Albert. My response would be yes, there are efforts, in part my work as well as that of Jonathan's, as Jonathan discussed, how we as academicians are engaged primarily within the criminal justice realm to help address these larger issues that are affecting our nation. Now, you as a graduate of the Levin College or a doctoral candidate and soon to be graduate, hopefully, you will, in my view, be part of that. I am working on your dissertation committee, so I know the research that you are pursuing, and it can have significant impact. So I think what we have to do is continue to provide opportunities and encourage our students to engage in that realm of research and scholarship.
Yeah, I think it's a two-way street, that the local institutions like the police departments, fire departments, and so forth have to think about local universities as opportunities to tap into expertise. And we in those institutions have to get out and engage with those. I think that it's important, we don't want to be a university that's an ivory tower that's kind of doing our own thing. I think that it's very important for the deans and the administration and the president and our other faculty members to think of our role as faculty members. One thing, we have 3 jobs is what we're told, which is teaching, scholarship, and service. Service is often work within the institution, work on committees and so forth, but I think there should be a strong emphasis at a place like CSU of evaluating people and giving people promotions and benefits based on demonstrated engagement with the local institutions, right? That Professor Dunn is out there working in this task force trying to actually improve a local issue, and that should be something that we really recognize him for, and that's a big part of our mission. So I think that it can go both ways, but there's a lot of opportunity there.
Hi, I'm Cameron Caputi. I'm a student in the Urban College as well. I had a question about, in this race for mayor, it seems to be a very pertinent question of investment in the downtown versus investment in the neighborhood. I'm wondering if you think there's some kind of balance that we need to reach, or if we're happy where we're at right now. I think the city sometimes subscribes to a trickle-down theory of downtown investment, both public and private. I'm not working on my doctoral, so I can't tell if that's good or not. But I was wondering if you guys could let me know. Thanks.
Well, I didn't get to be dean by being dumb. Where's Dennis Keating? Did Dennis leave? Yeah, go ahead.
So great question. But there's nuance, right, to every question, and knowing the facts and the detail to help you arrive at a conclusion that you can feel comfortable with. In the ward that I represent, I don't represent downtown, Ward 15, nearly $1 billion, $1 billion of economic development activity in my district alone since I've been the councilman in 2003, $1 billion. Over the past 8 years, I saw a statistic just yesterday that of all of the economic development activity that has been led by the current administration, actually 90% of that are in neighborhoods. And a lot of the private investment that's incurred, a lot of the investment that's incurred in the center city, a lot of that is private, but you do need that balance. And let's face it, trickle-down economics didn't work for us in the 80s. It didn't work for us, again, when it was revisited in the early 2000s, when Speaker Gingrich was floating that out there again. But you do need to have that balance. But I would carefully challenge those here who feel there's this competing interest of the haves and the have-nots, downtown versus neighborhoods. I can tell you factually, as an elected leader of the city of Cleveland, that 90% of all investment that has been levied in the last 8 years has happened in neighborhoods, not in the downtown central business district.
Have you noticed, by the way, that every time Dean Anglin takes the mic, he gives it to somebody who is at the urban school? Enough of this already. I'm announcing this evening early admission to the law school. For anybody who wants to ask a question, you automatically get admitted. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Looks like I'm a newly admitted student to Cleveland Marshall, so. Yeah, so I was admitted to the Cleveland Marshall program. I don't want to say where I got my, my bachelor's, and I'm working on my master's, but it's local. It's close. So the question I actually have is for someone like Dean Fisher or possibly Councilman Zone. You talked about building an understanding, trying to understand different perspectives. And I think that is a problem that we're having as a country, especially amongst the youth. We're very passionate folks, but we sometimes are having a difficult time having that conversation. What do you think are the best venues or the best place or the best way to build that understanding?
The best place to learn that understanding is the Cleveland Marshall College of Law. And let me explain why. Because you will find when you start your classes this fall, and I know you were admitted to more than one school, but I also know that you've already decided that the only school to go to is Cleveland Marshall. You'll find that one of the things we're known for is our national moot court team. And one of the things you learn in moot court is that you sometimes have to take the position with which you disagree. In other words, you have to take the position that you're given, not the one that you necessarily want. One of the things you learn in law school is critical thinking, being able to seek to first understand and then to be understood. And I actually do believe, honestly, although I was being somewhat facetious, that the greatest thing we can teach anybody at Cleveland State University, either undergraduate or graduate, is the ability to pause for a second and to think about the other person's point of view. And that's exactly what we train you to do as a lawyer. If you become a law clerk for a federal or a state judge, you will not always agree with what they have to say, and hopefully that judge will give you the opportunity to state your view. But in the end, the judge will say to you, write the draft opinion, and this is what I want you to say. It's a wonderful experience because if you understand that part of education is learning the other viewpoint, it begins to establish that culture of trust we talked about.
My name is Eric Johnson, alumnus of the Levin College of Urban Affairs. Messing up your flow totally.
Yes, you are. Yeah,
done a lot of research regarding workforce development and wages. And as you stated, per capita income is a definite indicator about how a city's doing. And apparently we're not doing that well. So with that said, and the way the world is going these days toward more education, how do we talk to a population that averages roughly $17,000 a year in income to come down to an education, to come down to college and get an education with the growing burden cost of pursuing a degree, and even an advanced degree? How do we convince them to do that in spite of what they face?
That's a fantastic question. And we actually have done some research that shows that it's not a matter of making the value proposition. People understand that if they are able to get a college degree or to get a post-secondary certificate, that their odds of getting a job that will pay them a better wage are going to increase exponentially. So it's not that they need convincing of that. What they need help understanding is that there are going to be some short-term sacrifices that will need to be made in order to make that happen. Or what people need help understanding is, how can I pursue that post-secondary education when I need to keep the lights on? I need to provide for my family in the interim. And so that's where these partnerships, these post-secondary partnerships, workforce partnerships, where individuals are able to get support from their employers to go back to school, where institutions are providing flexible schedules so that students know every day that they're going to be able to take a course from 9 to 12 or a series of courses, and then they're able to have a work schedule that doesn't need to be as flexible. And so these community workforce partnerships are vitally important so that individuals who understand that obtaining a post-secondary credential is going to transform their lives and their families' lives are actually able to take advantage of those opportunities. But the institutions and the employers have to be at the table together to make that happen.
Dr. Donetta, I have a question. The survey that you were talking about earlier, you said that most people that don't have parents that have a secondary education or higher, that more or less the kids have a chance of not getting one themselves. Where did they come up with those numbers and those facts?
Can you repeat that? I think that you're talking about the slide that I put up by income, where, is that the one that you're talking about, sir?
It was a graph you had, I believe it was in yellow and gray, saying that some people, they don't get a secondary education because their parents didn't get a secondary education. And they have a lower chance of getting that second education because they lived in the lifestyle that they lived in.
So I'm trying to remember what particular slide that is, but I can say that one of the highest indicators of educational attainment is parental educational attainment. So when you're the first person in your family to achieve or to obtain a college degree, odds are that everyone in your family after you is much more likely themselves to earn a college degree because they see what is possible. So it's a game changer. It's a very big deal when first-generation students come to college, right? So we celebrate every time there's a first-generation student who's not only able to make it through the door, but then to make it across the graduation stage, because that means that the life chances of everyone who comes after them have just totally been transformed. But the research, and there's a lot of research, and I'm happy to talk to you afterward, it's very clear that parental education, primarily mother's educational level, is the primary indicator of what happens in terms of a child's educational outcome.
Thank you. I'm not going to school here at all, I'm sorry. But I'd like to step this back just a little. In the last 10 years, we've really seen that preschool to third grade is the best time to start educating people to set that standard for them. So my question is, of these institutions that we've now been talking about, are any of them engaged in that early childhood education?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I got a lot more credibility when I get questions like this now that I have my own children, I have to say. But this is why I loved the way that you answered one of the last questions about scholarship, research, and service. And service not being just about what you do on campus, but how you reach into the community. Because there is so much expertise on campuses about education and giving back. Most colleges have exceptional colleges of education where they are training future teachers. And those colleges of education and those professors are also, should be, going into the communities, doing work. Teachers are doing their student teaching in neighborhood communities, in neighborhood schools. So certainly that work has to happen at their earliest levels. And what we see, those of us who work on the higher education side, when students come to our campuses and they need remediation or they are falling behind very early on, that doesn't start when they enter the college classroom. That has started very, very early on. Sometimes as early as kindergarten, you're already seeing those achievement gaps. So it's very important that that partnership is at all levels within that community, university, workforce. Absolutely.
Dr. Howard, can you stay up here? Your question reminds me of an example. I don't know if Dr. Howard wants to talk about it. Say yes. Is that some of a little bit an answer to her question also, or is that not relevant?
It is. Now, I'm not a say yes expert, though, so
Okay. Well, Say Yes is a partnership that's in a few cities. The one that I know in Syracuse, New York, where the higher educational institution is involved in a partnership with the public schools. We're putting wraparound services right from kindergarten up to make sure that throughout the pipeline, these kids get the services that they need, and at the end of the pipeline, they have a chance to get to college. So it's not just a hope and a prayer. It's very intentional. And there are lots of partnerships like this springing up all over the country, and the early say on them is that they make a difference.
And also want to remind you, as Councilman Zone said at the very beginning, the premier partnership that exists, I think, in the state of Ohio, exists right on this campus with the Cleveland Public Schools and Campus International School and MC Squared, and what President Berkman has created as an educational park, understanding, as Roland Englund said, that we're talking about an education system that is cradle to career, not K through 12, not even K through 16. But cradle to career. We had a question over here.
Hi, my name's Lita Shukuluk. I actually have the honor and privilege to have the opportunity to teach at an urban district. And the one thing I just wanted to say first is that when you had mentioned or had said that seek to understand before you're understood, that is like, when you said that, I got chills, because that is, until I learned how to do that, and until I realized that, I couldn't get anywhere with any of the students until I could actually understand each of their individual needs. And then I could actually create a learning environment and differentiate in such a way that each student had the opportunity to be successful. So that was awesome. Not that you didn't know that, but anyway. So, but my question is, and this is something that our district struggles with, is that we, like, as you're saying, like providing all these opportunities with, colleges and hospitals to provide these, these gateways for students to be successful, yet these students all come from, each student has some life that they're coming from that is such a struggle. I mean, you find out every single one, and they're so different, and education is not the priority. So that, I mean, from where, just the chain of how they've grown up, and it's heartbreaking, because I could literally like shake a kid and say, look, this is great, look what you have, come on, and they're still so hesitant to actually take those steps because they have a whole different world that they have going on. And I guess, so my question is, what, obviously, like, this is something that I'm very passionate about, because I want every student to at least have some path of success outside of where they're at. And what is, what's the answer to that? Because is there any kind of stepping stone, even in Cleveland, to actually get in and have people, I mean, I don't know if there's a mentoring program that you suggest or something, but I almost feel like each student needs, something more, because they don't have that example at home. Not everyone, but there's a large percentage where that is not the key, thing that they're worried about. So,
Thank you. There are models where you get help for the family in the school. So if a mom and dad needs workforce training, they get it in the school. And that shows the value of education and brings the whole family into the process, which I think takes care of the separation and not seeing the value of education, because the school is actually catering to the needs of the family. So that's one way of doing it.
There actually is an example of that over in Slavic Village. There's a holistic program, pre-K through 16, that is based off the model of the Harlem's Children's Zone, where it provides holistic support for not only the student, but their family. And I think Dean Anglin mentioned the YES program. And so they're all based off of those types of models. And actually, Third Federal Bank is an anchor institution in Slavic Village, and they are funding, they're one of the primary funders of that initiative. So I would encourage you to take a look at that program there. It is local.
I just wanted to give a shout out to something here in Cleveland that's not quite what you're talking about, but touches on this. We're at 21st and Euclid, I think, here. So if you go up about 14 blocks around 35th and Euclid, there's the Newbridge Center for Arts and Technology. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a remarkable program put together by 3 of our anchor institutions in this city, the Cleveland Foundation, the oldest community foundation in the country, a few blocks down, Cleveland Clinic, University Hospitals, all put money into it for 2 purposes. One, to create programs, really extraordinary programs to awaken the imagination of kids after school. So kids come to this, some of them 2, 3 bus rides to get to this center right up the street, and they learn photography, and they learn pottery, and they learn hip-hop music production with a world-class music producer. And the energy and the aliveness that they're getting from being in a facility as beautiful as this, unlike anything they've been to, that's really for them, is extraordinary. And what's happening with these kids over the years is really amazing. But there's something for the adults, too. There's a training center for people from low-income neighborhoods, very specific neighborhoods, who receive training from the hospitals to become phlebotomists, pharmacy technologists, whatever it's called, a couple other things. And unlike many workforce programs where people get trained and trained and trained over and over and over again, there's no job at the end of that training. You just have a certificate, but no job. These people are almost guaranteed, and about 135 now have gone through the training and now have jobs at Cleveland Clinic or university hospitals. So that one center is touching both the parents and the kids in different ways. And it's really one of the most tremendous assets of this community. And I really want to give praise here to the Cleveland Foundation. And some of you here probably know India Pierce-Lee, who's their executive vice president, who said, we want to build this kind of center in our community. And it's right up the street. And people from all over the country come here to visit that center as a model. The Newbridge Center for Arts and Technology. And if you Google for it, you'll find it.
Thank you. My name is Michael Dover. I teach social work here at the School of Social Work, and I have a degree in sociology from that school up north. One of the statistics I learned there was what was called the Gini coefficient of inequality. And I'm wondering what you would think would happen if we were to look at the Gini coefficient of inequality, the compensation structure of our anchor institutions here. Now, I really like what I heard from Dr. Howard about them, flexible work, maybe industrial childcare, all kinds of things that they could do to make it more possible. But while they may have given 200 jobs to Evergreen, they've given hundreds and hundreds of jobs at subliving wage to Sodexo, which also contracts with them on their laundry. Sodexo also contracts with them on their food service. All of our anchor institutions are contracting out jobs at subliving wages. And our anchor institutions themselves are not paying living wages. So my question to you is this: can the Anchor Institutions 2.0 pledge to pay a living wage to all of its contractors and employees, and regularly report to the public on their coefficient of inequality, perhaps even as a condition of continuing to enjoy the property tax exemption, which was the subject of my dissertation. Thank you very much.
So you're staying, right? Oh, I thought you were just throwing that bomb in and leaving. So I think this is a really good point. I was working in Pittsburgh at a hospital not to be named, and I mean, major health system in the city of Pittsburgh. And this was a few years ago, and it was around the holidays, around Christmas, right before, and I was walking through, and this system was talking about all the good things they're doing for the community and blah, blah, blah. And I came across this big table filled with cans of beans and peaches and rice. I said, are you collecting food for the community, for the holidays? What is this? And they said, no. These are our staff have brought this, but it's for our low-wage workers who can't afford Christmas dinner. It was absolutely, I mean, it was searing. I've never forgotten that. So I think your challenge is a really good one. I mean, we need to be, let's be real. I painted, hopefully, a somewhat compelling picture about the power of these institutions, but they're big bureaucracies. They've got a very checkered history. Many of them not good relationships with the community. They're finally transcending some of that. They have all their own internal contradictions. You're quite right. Most of them are nonprofit, so under the tax statutes, they're not paying taxes. There's been a push to make them more accountable accordingly. And I think, it's up to us to press forward on that sort of agenda. And I know, one of the hospitals here does do work with Sodexo. I understand all the problems. But all I could say is my interest is at a time when nationally the money available for equitable and inclusive community and economic development is so constrained. And if you look at the budget the president is proposing, which of course won't be passed in full, but takes away $54 billion from everything from Meals on Wheels to low-income housing tax credits to community development block grants to all the things that Matt Zone has used to bring $1 billion of investment into his neighborhoods. At this time, we need to not only push back against that, but we need to ask where are the resources to do the work that needs to be done? And the answer is they're in our community if we can free them up. And part of that freeing them up, I believe, is institutions are going to have to deal with some of these inherent contradictions. So I think your point's a good one, but it doesn't stop me from interacting with them and trying to push further and further.
I love that question. Thank you. And I think that those of us who have a platform also have a responsibility to be mindful of who we hold up as exemplars. And in our work, we are very careful about what institutions we hold up as exemplars because, as you know, many institutions have incredible graduation rates, for example, but they also have incredible gaps in their graduation rates. So not everyone is completing. Some students are falling very far behind. And so I think that's an excellent reminder. Thank you for the question.
I'm going to come back to my original question, which goes back to the Dean's reference to Anchor Institution 2.0. And I'm going to go back to Detroit. Now, Detroit is a very agricultural economy. It's surrounded by a very agricultural market from a regional standpoint. So one of the things the Ford Health System did in their commitment to local, and I'm not a fan of Sodexo, and you can quote me on that, just because of some of their practices and how they've actually, what I will say, negatively influenced local business development. But one of the things Ford did was they made a commitment of 35%, not only local, but hiring entrepreneurial companies. Now, Detroit, again, was in a very different situation, and they had a lot of money that they were putting into the urban agricultural development with young farmers, but it was more than that. It was more than just servicing the food. One of the things we discovered was there were small businesses who couldn't access Eastern market because they couldn't tap into the distribution channels that were sitting up here that Sodexo was dealing with. So we were able to identify here was an entire economy that wasn't being utilized. It was low-educated workers, if you will. They didn't have secondary degrees, but it was certainly something that people could aspire to. So that was what Ford did, and they looked at that, and they started targeting that, and they started, I will say, lowering the base of Sodexo's threshold on the economics. So that's my answer to the sociology professor, but then I'll throw it back to the democracy.
Just one point, you know, so the reality is when you're doing this work, right, you've got these anchor institutions and they're having vendor relationships with Sodexo and Aramark and big multinational corporations, and that's the world they're in. What we're trying to do is move them more and more local, but the reality is with our greenhouse, the Green City Growers, what University Hospitals and Cleveland Clinic went out and did was the following. They don't buy their own lettuce. They do buy laundry services, but they don't buy their own lettuce as an institution. They contract with Aramark or Sodexo, and that company provides their food service. So UH and the clinic went to their food providers and said, look, we want our contract rewritten with an amendment that says all leafy greens that we purchase will come from this worker-owned cooperative in the central neighborhood that's employing people that we want employed. Will you put that in the contract? And the answer was, well, no one asked us that before, but sure, if that's where you want it to come from. Similarly, university hospitals changed part of their procurement procedures. They had a big contract coming up with, for a medical distribution center. Only 5 companies in America, one of them is called Owens & Minor, provide this distribution service ability. And university hospitals said, we're going to issue this contract. It's going to be, it used to be 5 years, it's $75 million. We're changing, it's going to be a 10-year contract. It's $75 million, but the winner of the contract will not only be price competitive, the company will agree to build a facility in one of our low-income neighborhoods and hire people locally to do the work, and that isn't minimum wage work. That facility now exists on East 55th Street, right by the lake, right by 90. It's been built, and there's something like 50 or 60 jobs that have moved into the city. So anchor institutions, because of their economic power, can really shape a local market. And again, I think our job is to encourage them to do that and bring that value to those relationships with companies that might not particularly care about Cleveland, but if they're going to get a $50 million contract, they're going to start to care about Cleveland if the owner of the contract presses them to do so.
Hello? Oh, thank you. First, I want to say thank you guys for coming, and it's been very enjoyable for something I'm interested in. To add on to her last question, one of the things that I've been told or have watched or heard was that, in particular with Detroit, is whenever someone's newly elected or the mayor or councilman, is that they have so many ideas and they come in and they open the book per se, and it's a lot worse than I thought. Or compared to Cleveland, where at one point, or many people stereotypically think it's at that level, but it's probably a lot better, and it's on the uprise, as all of you guys have said. For someone like me, or for anyone, a newly elected mayor or a student, what's the first step that we can give back? Whether it be volunteering time, well, it's the only example I have on the top of my head, but so for each of you guys, what's the first step that you guys recommend?
Well, Dean England put this microphone in my hand. I would encourage you to get involved in your community that you live. If that means working and volunteering or serving on a nonprofit board, volunteering, finding out that social network that you can really make an impact. Find a local elected official who you feel shares your value. Get to know that individual. Work with that individual. and tried to affect change that way. These series of last questions are so important. When you look at what's happening in our country today, the income inequality gap is the greatest it's ever been since 1928. That was the year before the Great Depression. And when you look at what Hispanic households earn, they earn about 70% of what white households earn. African-American households earn only about 58%. And if we're really going to create true economic mobility and opportunity, it has to be for all people. I served with a local legend on Cleveland City Council. She's no longer with us, and I know Miss Lewis is looking down, Fannie M. Lewis. Here's a woman who ran for city council 5 times. She won on her 5th try, and she grew up as a single mom in welfare and really worked her whole career, professional career as a council member, to figure out how can we lift up all people in the community we serve. And we put forth an ordinance right before Ms. Lewis passed away in 2007 called the Fannie M. Lewis Law that requires that whenever we put out a contract that exceeds over $100,000, that 20% of that workforce has to be Clevelanders. And that's not defined in the city of Cleveland. That's the greater Cleveland region. But that 4% of all hours, work hours performed on that job must come from low-income employees. And if we're going to lift up a region, it has to start that way. So find somebody who you feel shares your value. They could even be a school board member. They could be a state rep. Get to know them, get involved on a local board, and try to impact a change that way.
Ronnie, go ahead. Here you go.
To Councilman Zone's point, I'm an alum of Cleveland State University, undergrad, master's, and doctorate degree, and I actually started engaged at the community level with Ms. Lewis. She was my mentor. And myself and State Senator Nina Turner, we started a student organization, and we were doing community outreach, voter registration, voter education over in Huff with Ms. Lewis. So as the councilman said, find someone that their values and views align with yours and get engaged. It's not when you walk across that stage that you become the professional or the person that you want to be. You're in process now, so I would encourage you to do that.
I've been told that we have time only for one more question, so I want to ask, how many of you still have questions? We got one. Would you come over here for a second? Anybody else? Anybody's got a question, please come up here. And I know you've got a question. Anybody else? Okay, 2 questions. Come on up here real quick. This is how we handle the final question. I'd like you both to stand. Okay? And you're going to both ask a question before we give the answer. Therefore, that's considered one question. Okay, there you go.
So there was a lot of conversation about change happening at the most local of levels from the bottom up. I think in light of the recent election, the national election, there was a lot of discouragement on behalf of, especially the Democratic side. There was a lot of division and unorganization. So, Councilman, maybe this is a question for you. How do we revitalize groups, the people on the local level, to not be afraid to, fight for change and not get discouraged about the happenings of DC? Like you were saying, there's always issues in DC and on the national level right now. So what can we do to revitalize and unify groups and really strive for change?
And the other half of that question is?
This is also a question for Mr. Zone. My question is, how genuine is it from the other anchor institutions outside of Cleveland State and wanting to put that connection with Aramark where they put that building in Cleveland? Is it genuine from those leadership councils, or is it more the council members leaning on them in Ward 6 and 7 and saying, we really need this in the city?
All right, 2 great questions. First of all, I'm incredibly proud to serve as a representative of the city of Cleveland. And watching what happened in 2016 made me sick to my stomach. and how we create change. I was proud to work with a group of people in our community after the election who really wanted to affect change in a positive way, kind of that appreciative inquiry type of method, not really just always complaining about something, but what can we do positive? And so in my neighborhood, I helped sponsor, we sent 3 busloads of women from our neighborhood down to the Women's March. And they went there so they could have their voice heard. I remember when I was a young student here in 1984, and at that time, President Reagan was speaking at the City Club. And I helped organize a group of people where we went out and protest in front of the City Club to have our voice heard about issues that he was advancing with an initiative called Star Wars. Some of my colleagues over here will remember what that was, but they wanted to put like missiles and bombs up in the sky to blow people up. That's the best way you can create change. When there was a lot of civil unrest, not violence, but just people wanting their voices heard over a lot of this unrest with community and police, and people were out in the streets having their voice heard. That's how I got to meet Bishop. And you know, Bishop is not shy about sharing his opinion, but he does it in a respectful way. And I think he's earned a lot of credibility and clout in our community just through activism. There's 2 types of activism, right? You can do it in a way that you're perceived as an anarchist or somebody who's not funneling and working positive. But that young man spent hundreds and hundreds of hours researching policies and practices and making sure his voice was heard. And so that's one way you can do it. To the second question, you know, council people have, to a certain degree, could influence an economic development project. And I'll just cite one example of a project in my ward. Over the past 2 years, the city has been exploring what's called these community benefit agreements. They're non-binding contracts that you enter into with the development. If the developer is going to ask for something, we should demand, oh, where's that young man who asked that question? There he is. If a developer is going to ask for something, we as a community should demand something back for the community that benefits the community. So I had a large housing development project that was going in my district. They weren't asking for any city money. The only thing that they needed from the city of Cleveland was me to change the land use, the zoning. So I used that as a leverage point to connect a multi-purpose path, make sure that the development was integrated into the existing street grid, and that they created connectivity where this multi-purpose path along the lakefront wasn't going. That cost that developer $700,000. But you know what? Today, they said it was a better project. It made their project better. And at the end of the day, who benefited? The residents not only who live in that community, but all of the citizens of the city of Cleveland. So anytime that you can create leverage and use that for positive good for the community, that's always a benefit. I want to thank our speakers. Dean England, you want to, any last comment?
Councilman Zone, you have the mic, so take us out.
Thank you. I want to thank our good Dean England from the Levin College. Give him a nice round of applause. Interim Dean Lee Fisher from Cleveland Marshall College Law. Give it up for Lee. Ted Howard from the Democracy Collaborative. Thank you. Dr. Howard and your mom, amazing influence on you. Thank you for that. Give it up. And to our 2 amazing professors, Professor Whitman Rich and Professor Ronnie Dunn. Thank you all for being here. There's plenty of food, some libations, and the panelists will be here to discuss any questions all of you have. Thank you for being here this evening.